The ceremonial hall fell into stunned silence the moment Kelsey crossed the marble floor and sat on the Alpha King's lap. Gasps rippled through the chamber. No one had ever touched Herbert Burleson without permission, much less during the sacred bonding ceremony. The ancient torches mounted on stone pillars seemed to flicker in response to the collective shock, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the assembled wolves. Kelsey felt every pair of eyes boring into her back, but she kept her spine straight. Her chin lifted even as her hands trembled against the crimson silk of her ceremonial gown. Across the hall, Ralph stood frozen beside her younger sister Ramirez, his mouth curved in that same charming smile. The smile he'd worn the night he orchestrated their parents' deaths 3 years ago. The memory of it made bile rise in Kelsey's throat. She could still see the accident report, still remember the too convenient hunting tragedy that had stripped Ramirez of protection and positioned Ralph perfectly to claim their bloodline. She could still picture him at the funeral, offering condolences with such practiced sympathy, as if he hadn't just murdered 2 people to get closer to the ember gift flowing through their family's veins. Kelsey's voice trembled, but her defiance didn't. By blood and bone, by fire and choice, I claim sanctuary under the eternal throne. The ancient words hung in the air like a challenge. Several council members rose from their seats, their protests already forming on their lips. But Herbert Burleson, the king who had ruled for 3 centuries without mercy, without warmth, without a single moment of visible weakness, merely shifted beneath her, one powerful arm curving around her waist with deliberate slowness. His chest was solid against her back, radiating a heat that felt almost inhuman. Kelsey forced herself not to flinch, not to show the fear that clawed at her insides. She'd gambled everything on this moment, on the ancient laws that even a king couldn't entirely ignore. Behind her, she heard Ramirez's sharp intake of breath, saw Ralph's charming mask crack just slightly to reveal the rage beneath. And that was how war began. Hello, lovely listeners. Before we dive deeper into this epic tale of sacrifice, sisterhood, and unexpected love, I'd truly appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means the world to me and helps me bring you more amazing content. Now, let's jump into Kelsey's world. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when she makes the boldest move of her life. Every female born to a distinguished bloodline had one destiny: to be protected, to preserve the family's ancient gifts, to eventually bond with someone deemed worthy by the elders. Kelsey had spent her entire life as her younger sister's guardian, watching over Ramirez with fierce devotion after their parents' deaths. She'd imagined the bonding ceremony 1,000 different ways, some where Ramirez would be nervous, some where she'd be excited, all of them ending with Kelsey standing proudly in the crowd as her sister accepted a good match with grace and dignity, as their mother had, as their grandmother had, as every woman in their bloodline had done for generations. But when the mark on Ramirez's wrist began to glow that evening, when the sacred flame in the center of the ceremonial hall flared crimson and gold, pointing unmistakably toward Ralph of the Shadowpine Pack, Kelsey's heart didn't soar with relief. It turned to ice. He was impressive. That much was undeniable. His reputation was spotless, his standing in the council strong. Handsome, too, in the way that dangerous things often were, with sharp features and a smile that seemed to promise protection and devotion. The unmated females in the hall had sighed when he'd stepped forward to claim Ramirez, their envy palpable. Kelsey had wanted to scream. The council had descended upon them immediately after the revelation, their faces glowing with satisfaction. High Elder Thorne, his silver hair braided with ceremonial beads, had clasped Ramirez's shoulder with what he probably thought was paternal warmth. A fine match, child. The Shadowpine bloodline is strong, and Ralph is a proven protector. Your sister must be so pleased. Pleased. To watch Ramirez bond with the wolf who had orchestrated their parents' deaths. Kelsey had smiled through numb lips, nodded at the appropriate moments, accepted the congratulations that felt like condolences. Across the hall, Ralph had watched her with those dark, intelligent eyes, and she'd seen the satisfaction there, the knowing. He'd gotten away with it. Their parents' deaths had been ruled a tragic accident during a hunting expedition. A rock slide in unstable territory, they'd said. Never mind that her father had navigated those mountains for 30 years without incident. Never mind that 2 witnesses had mysteriously revised their accounts overnight. Never mind that Ralph's pack had gained access to their family's ancestral lands and proximity to the Ember bloodline within a week of the funeral. The mark on Ramirez's wrist burned brighter, as if fate herself was insisting on this union. Kelsey had watched her sister's trembling smile, the way Ramirez tried to look happy despite the confusion in her eyes, and understood with terrible clarity that she had 2 choices: allow the bond that would deliver her sister to a murderer for life, or defy sacred law and face consequences that would destroy them both. The law was clear. To interfere with a chosen bond was to spit in the face of destiny, to invite divine wrath upon yourself and your entire bloodline. Families who resisted chosen bonds were stripped of rank, protection, and often their lives. Most didn't survive a season as outcasts, but Kelsey had never been particularly good at accepting impossible situations. She'd spent 3 sleepless nights in the royal archives, researching every dusty tome and obscure legal text she could access, bribing guards and calling in every favor she'd ever earned. The answer, when she found it, was so dangerous that she'd laughed until tears streamed down her face. There was one law older than the bonding ceremonies, one power that superseded even fate's matchmaking: the right of blood sanctuary under the Alpha King. It was ancient, barely remembered, a relic from the days when the territories had been fractured and constantly at war. Any wolf could appeal directly to the king for protection, pledging their complete service and bloodline in exchange for his shield against all enemies, including chosen mates. The catch, of course, was that the king had to accept. And Herbert Burleson, the immortal Alpha King who ruled from his obsidian throne with cold precision, hadn't granted sanctuary to anyone in over 70 years. He was known for his distance, his lack of mercy, his complete disinterest in the petty politics of bonding ceremonies and bloodline disputes. Still, Kelsey had no other options, so she put on her finest gown, crimson silk that seemed to burn in candlelight, with gold embroidery at the bodice that caught the light, and made her way to the throne room on the night of the final bonding ceremony, where matches were officially sealed before the entire court. She'd planned to kneel before the throne, to make her petition formal and proper. But then she'd seen Ralph enter from the opposite door, his ceremonial cloak pristine and perfect, and she'd caught his eyes on Ramirez. Possessive, calculating, already claiming what he believed was his. The rage that flooded through her was white-hot and utterly reckless. So she'd walked across that polished marble floor, past the shocked whispers and gasped protests, straight up the dais steps to where Herbert Burleson sat on his throne of blackened iron and ancient oak. The king had watched her approach with eyes the color of molten amber, his expression unreadable behind 3 centuries of practiced control. And then she'd sat on his lap. The throne room had erupted in chaos. Council members shouted over each other. Guards reached for weapons before thinking better of challenging the king's space. And somewhere in the back, a young female wolf had actually fainted from the audacity of it. But Herbert hadn't moved. His arm had come around her waist slowly, almost curiously, as if she were some strange creature he was examining. When she'd spoken the words of sanctuary, his fingers had tightened slightly against her hip. Not painfully, but with clear, unmistakable possession. By blood and bone, by fire and choice, I claim sanctuary under the eternal throne, Kelsey repeated, louder this time, making sure every wolf in the hall could hear. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack them. My life, my magic, my service, all are yours, Alpha King, if you will shield my sister from the wolf who wears a false mate's mark. The silence that followed was deafening. Ralph's charming mask finally cracked completely, revealing the cold fury beneath. "This is blasphemy," he snarled, his voice cutting through the hall. "The match has been made. The flame has spoken. She cannot." "Cannot?" Herbert's voice was low, a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the stone itself. His grip on Kelsey's waist tightened just slightly, drawing her more firmly against his chest. "You presume to tell me what laws govern my throne?" For the first time in her life, Kelsey saw Ralph hesitate. Herbert's amber eyes never left Ralph's face as he spoke, each word deliberate and final. "I accept your oath, Kelsey of the Ember Line." His voice carried across the silent hall like a verdict. "From this moment, you belong to me. Your bloodline answers to my call. Your service is mine to command. And your sister—" He paused, letting the weight of ancient power fill the space. "Falls under my protection as well." The bonding flame on the altar flickered once, twice, then died completely. The mark on Ramirez's wrist faded to nothing, the bond severed before it could be sealed. Kelsey felt Herbert's breath against her ear, warm and deliberate. "I won't let him touch you," he said softly, words meant only for her. "Either of you." And as chaos erupted around them, Ralph's furious protests, the council's outraged demands, Ramirez's shocked tears of relief, Kelsey realized what she'd done. She'd saved her sister by trading one danger for another. She'd placed them both under the protection of an immortal king whose true intentions remained completely unknown. As Herbert's arm remained possessively around her waist and his ancient eyes assessed her with dangerous interest, Kelsey understood one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next would change everything. The game had begun. And the Alpha King never played games he didn't intend to win. The weeks leading up to the bonding ceremony had been a special kind of torment. Kelsey had watched Ramirez practice her ceremonial responses, had helped her sister choose the pale blue gown that made her look ethereal and innocent, had braided silver ribbons into her hair while pretending everything would be fine. All the while, the evidence she'd uncovered burned in her mind like acid. The night she'd found the truth, she'd been searching their father's old study for anything. Any legal precedent, any loophole, any shred of hope. Instead, she'd discovered his private journals, hidden behind a false panel in his desk. The entries from his final weeks were damning. He'd suspected Ralph's interest in their bloodline, had documented strange meetings and veiled threats, had even begun investigating the Shadowpine Pack's sudden interest in Ember gift magic. The final entry, written the morning of the hunting trip, was chilling in its prescience. "If something happens to me today, it will be no accident. Ralph has grown too bold, too certain. He wants what we protect, and he'll stop at nothing to claim it." The journal had fallen from Kelsey's trembling hands. Her father had known. He'd walked into that trap knowing, trying to protect them even as it cost him everything. She'd found the reference to Blood Sanctuary 2 nights before the ceremony, buried in a text so old the pages crumbled at her touch. The archaic language had been difficult to parse, but the meaning was clear. Any wolf could pledge themselves completely to the Alpha King in exchange for his protection, superseding all other claims. It was a last resort from an era when survival meant making impossible bargains with the only power strong enough to shield you from enemies. The risk was enormous. If Herbert refused, Kelsey would be marked as a troublemaker, possibly exiled, and Ramirez would still be bound to Ralph. If he accepted, Kelsey would belong to him absolutely. Body, magic, obedience, with no guarantee he wouldn't simply use her Ember gift for his own purposes before discarding her. But watching Ramirez practice smiling at Ralph's name, seeing her sister's brave face crumble when she thought no one was looking, Kelsey knew there was no choice at all. The ceremony itself had been exquisite torture. The hall was packed with nobles and elders, all dressed in their finest. The bonding flame burned at the center of the room, its light casting everything in shades of gold and crimson. Ramirez stood on the raised platform in her blue gown, looking so young, so vulnerable, as the priestess began the ancient rites. When the flame surged and pointed toward Ralph, when her sister's mark began to glow, Kelsey had felt something inside her snap. Ralph stepped forward with that perfect smile, extending his hand toward Ramirez like a gentleman, like a protector, like anything other than the murderer he was. The crowd murmured approval. High Elder Thorne beamed, and Ramirez, sweet Ramirez who'd been raised to be obedient and gracious, reached out to accept her fate. That was when Kelsey moved. She didn't run. She walked, slowly and deliberately, letting every step ring out against the marble floor. The crowd's murmurs turned to gasps, then to shocked silence. Council members rose from their seats, calling out protests and warnings. But Kelsey kept walking, kept climbing the dais steps until she stood before the obsidian throne, where Herbert Burleson sat like a statue carved from ancient stone. For 3 centuries, he'd ruled without warmth, without weakness. His amber eyes held the weight of empires risen and fallen. Most wolves couldn't hold his gaze for more than a few seconds. Kelsey looked directly into those ancient eyes and sat on his lap. The hall exploded. Voices shouted over each other. Outrage, shock, demands for her removal. Guards stepped forward, hands on weapons, looking to the king for orders. But Herbert remained perfectly still, watching her with the focus of a predator assessing unexpected prey. Kelsey pressed her palm flat against his armored chest, feeling the steady beat of a heart that had survived centuries. By blood and bone, by fire and choice, I claim sanctuary under the eternal throne, she said, her voice carrying despite her fear. My life is yours, my magic is yours, my service, absolute and eternal, is yours, if you will grant me one thing in return. Kelsey, no! Ramirez's voice cracked across the hall, desperate and terrified. But Kelsey didn't look away from Herbert's burning gaze. Shield my sister from the wolf who murdered our parents. Protect her from the false mate who orchestrated their deaths to claim our bloodline. Grant us sanctuary, and I will give you everything. The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Ralph's face contorted with rage. You lying! This is slander! The Alpha King cannot possibly entertain such baseless— Can't I? Herbert's voice cut through the chaos like winter steel. His arm curved around Kelsey's waist, pulling her more firmly against him. The gesture was deliberate, possessive, unmistakable in its claim. You speak rather boldly for someone who's just been accused of murder in my hall, Ralph. The deaths were ruled accidental, Ralph snarled, by your own council. My council makes many rulings I don't personally oversee. Herbert's fingers flexed against Kelsey's hip, sending heat through the crimson silk. Perhaps it's time I took a more active interest in their decisions. High Elder Thorne stepped forward, his face flushed. Your Majesty, the bonding ceremony has already begun. The flame has spoken. To interfere now. The flame serves the moon, Herbert interrupted, but I serve no one. Blood sanctuary is older than your ceremonies, older than your council, older than the very stones of this hall. His gaze swept across the assembled wolves, and Kelsey felt the pure weight of his power radiating outward. Does anyone here dispute my authority to grant it? Silence. Even Thorne stepped back, recognizing the danger of challenging an immortal king directly. Herbert's attention returned to Kelsey, his amber eyes searching her face with unnerving intensity. You understand what you're offering? True sanctuary means true service. I can command anything of you. Your freedom, your magic, your very will becomes mine. I understand, Kelsey whispered. Save my sister. That's all I ask. Something flickered in those ancient eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. His grip on her waist tightened fractionally. Then I accept your oath, Kelsey of the Ember Line. From this moment, you belong to me. The bonding flame guttered and died. Ramirez's mark faded to nothing. And as chaos erupted once more, Herbert leaned close enough that only Kelsey could hear his next words, soft as a promise and sharp as a threat. "I won't let him touch you. Either of you." The summons came before dawn, delivered by a guard whose expression suggested he pitied her. Kelsey had barely slept, her mind replaying the ceremony's chaos. Ralph's fury as he was escorted from the hall. Ramirez's tearful embrace. The council's barely contained outrage. She'd expected consequences. She hadn't expected them quite so soon. Herbert's private chambers occupied the highest tower of the palace, accessible only by a spiral staircase carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The guard left her at a door reinforced with iron bands and ancient protective runes that pulsed faintly in the darkness. Kelsey raised her hand to knock, but the door swung open before her knuckles made contact, as if the king had been waiting. The room beyond was exactly what she should have expected, and somehow still unsettling. It was less a chamber and more a fortress, walls of dark stone covered in weapons that ranged from ceremonial to brutally practical, shelves lined with texts bound in leather so old it had gone black with age, and a massive desk covered in maps and documents that suggested Herbert personally oversaw every aspect of his territory. The few furnishings were stark and functional. Nothing soft, nothing warm, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here rather than simply existed between wars. Herbert stood by the window, silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. He'd removed his ceremonial armor, but the simple black clothing he wore now somehow made him seem more dangerous rather than less. Without the trappings of office, he was just a man who'd survived 3 centuries and carried the weight of it in every controlled movement. "Close the door," he said without turning. It wasn't a request. Kelsey obeyed, hearing the heavy lock click into place behind her. The sound felt ominously final. "Do you know why I accepted your oath last night?" Herbert turned to face her, his amber eyes catching the dim light like a wolf's. "Be honest. I'll know if you lie." "Because you're a king who values ancient law," Kelsey said carefully. "Or because you saw an opportunity to check Ralph's growing influence on the council." "Clever." He moved toward her with fluid grace, circling like a predator assessing prey. "But incomplete. Tell me, Kelsey of the Ember Line, what do you know about your bloodline's gift?" The question threw her. "It's protective magic. Fire that shields rather than destroys. It manifests during moments of sacrifice, when we put others before ourselves." "And how often has yours manifested?" "Never." The admission tasted like failure. "I've tried. After my parents died, I tried everything to awaken it, thinking it might help me protect Ramirez, but nothing worked." Herbert stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "That's because Ember gift magic doesn't respond to desperation or fear. It requires something deeper, something you weren't capable of until last night." "I don't understand." "You offered yourself completely. Not partially, not conditionally. You meant it. Every word of that oath." His hand rose, and Kelsey forced herself not to flinch as he traced the collar of her gown. That kind of absolute sacrifice, that willingness to surrender everything for someone else, that's what awakens the Ember gift. And I need it. The words landed like stones in her stomach. "You planned this. You knew what I was before I even entered that hall. I've known about the Ember bloodline since before your grandmother was born." Herbert's fingers moved to her wrist, pressing against her pulse point. "I've been waiting for someone desperate enough to invoke blood sanctuary and powerful enough to survive what comes next." "Which is?" Kelsey's voice came out steadier than she felt. Herbert released her wrist and moved to his desk, retrieving a scroll so ancient it should have been in a museum. He unrolled it carefully, revealing text in a language Kelsey didn't recognize and an illustration that made her blood run cold. A ritual circle, a blood moon, and a figure burning from the inside out. 312 years ago, my sister Alara was attacked by dark magic, Herbert said, his voice devoid of emotion in a way that suggested he'd told this story too many times. I arrived too late to save her, but not too late to watch her die. In my grief and rage, I performed a binding ritual, trying to anchor her soul to mine, to keep some part of her alive. He looked up, and for the first time, Kelsey saw something beyond cold calculation in those amber eyes, something raw and unhealed. The ritual backfired. Instead of saving her, I cursed myself. Immortality without peace. Endless life chained to endless guilt. Every night I relive her death. Every night for 3 centuries I watch her burn and feel my own helplessness. His jaw tightened. The curse can be broken, but it requires a specific kind of magic. Ember gift magic, channeled through a blood sanctuary bond during a blood moon. And then you'll be free, Kelsey said quietly. I'll be able to make my immortality permanent without the torment. Stable, controlled. Herbert rolled the scroll closed with careful precision. But the ritual is dangerous for the one who channels it. The magic burns through the caster's life force. Most wouldn't survive. Most. Kelsey seized on the word. But not all? You swore absolute service. That means if I command you to participate in this ritual, you cannot refuse. Do you understand? This is what blood sanctuary truly means. Your life is mine to spend as I see fit. The trap had closed completely. Kelsey had saved Ramirez from one murderer, only to deliver herself to another. Herbert would use her, burn through her magic and her life to heal his ancient wound, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The oath bound her absolutely. But as she stood there, seeing the careful blankness in Herbert's expression, she caught something else. That flash of old pain again, quickly hidden but unmistakably there. He'd told her about Alara, about his failure, about 3 centuries of nightly torment. He hadn't needed to share that. A truly cold strategist would have simply commanded her compliance without explanation. When is the blood moon? Kelsey asked. 6 weeks. Herbert watched her carefully, as if trying to read her reaction. I'm giving you time to prepare, to understand what you've agreed to. Or time to run? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across Herbert's face, there and gone in an instant. You could try, but we both know you won't. You didn't invoke blood sanctuary to save yourself. You did it for your sister. Running would void the protection and deliver Ramirez back to Ralph's influence. He was right, and they both knew it. Kelsey was trapped as surely as he was by his curse, bound by love and duty and impossible choices. You should hate me, Herbert said quietly. I'm using you exactly as Ralph would have. The only difference is honesty about it. Kelsey met his gaze, seeing the ancient pain there, the centuries of guilt and isolation. The difference, she said carefully, is that you're giving me 6 weeks. Ralph would have taken what he wanted immediately. Is that supposed to make me noble? Bitterness crept into Herbert's voice. I'm still going to burn through your life to save my own. Yes, Kelsey agreed. But for some reason you seem to care that it costs me. That's more than I expected from an immortal king. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken complexities. Finally, Herbert turned back to the window, a clear dismissal. You're free to go. Your sister has been moved to the protected wing. Ralph won't be able to reach either of you here. Kelsey moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the lock. Your Majesty? What was she like? Your sister? Herbert's shoulders tensed. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. Like you. Too brave for her own good. The door unlocked with a soft click, and Kelsey stepped back into the cold stone corridor, her mind churning. She'd bought Ramirez's safety at the cost of her own life. But somehow, impossibly, she suspected Herbert's trap might be more complicated than either of them had planned. The protected wing was luxurious in a way that felt like gilded imprisonment, Kelsey's quarters were 3 times the size of the room she'd shared with Ramirez back home, filled with fine furniture and tapestries that probably cost more than everything her family had owned. But luxury couldn't quiet her mind, couldn't stop her from calculating how many days remained until the blood moon, couldn't make her forget the resignation in Herbert's voice when he'd said he would burn through her life. Sleep refused to come. After hours of staring at embroidered bed canopy, Kelsey gave up and wrapped a robe around herself, stepping into the corridor. The palace at night was a different creature. Shadows pooled in corners, torches burned low, and the silence had weight to it, as if the ancient stones themselves were holding their breath. She wandered without direction, letting her feet carry her through halls lined with portraits of long-dead nobles and weapons mounted like trophies. She was trying to map the palace in her mind, trying to understand the place that would be her prison for the next 6 weeks, when she heard it. A sound, muffled by thick walls and distance, but unmistakably agonized. A man's voice, raw with pain and something worse than pain, despair so deep it had texture. Kelsey's healer instincts took over before rational thought could stop her. She followed the sound through corridors she shouldn't have known, up the black stone staircase to the tower, to the door that had locked behind her just hours ago. It stood open now, just a crack, and the sounds coming from within made her chest constrict. She should have walked away. Should have respected privacy, protocol, the vast gulf between a king and his sworn servant. Instead, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. Herbert was on his bed, the only concession to comfort in his Spartan chambers, but there was nothing restful about it. His body was rigid, hands clenched in sheets that looked ready to tear, head thrown back in a silent scream. Sweat soaked through his shirt. His eyes moved rapidly behind closed lids, seeing horrors only he could witness. "Elara, no, I'm here, The words ripped from him, broken and desperate. "Please, please, I can fix this, just hold on." Kelsey moved without thinking, crossing to the bed in 3 swift strides. She'd seen night terrors before, had helped Ramirez through them in the terrible months after their parents' deaths. But this was different. This wasn't trauma from months ago, but from centuries, carved so deep into Herbert's psyche that even immortality couldn't heal it. She reached out and placed her palm flat against his chest, exactly as she had during the oath ceremony, over his heart, where the ancient magic had recognized her pledge. The effect was immediate. Herbert's body went still, the rigid tension draining away as if she'd cut invisible strings. His breathing, which had been ragged and panicked, began to slow. The agonized expression smoothed into something closer to peace. Kelsey felt warmth bloom beneath her palm, not Herbert's body heat, but something else, something that pulsed in rhythm with her own heartbeat. The ember gift, still dormant but responding to his need, to the protective instinct that had driven every choice she'd made since their parents died. Herbert's eyes snapped open. For a moment he stared at her without recognition, still half trapped in whatever nightmare had held him. Then awareness flooded back, and with it, horror at his own vulnerability. He jerked away from her touch, putting distance between them so quickly he nearly fell off, the opposite side of the bed. "What are you doing here?" His voice was harsh, but Kelsey heard the tremor beneath it. "I heard you," she said simply. "I came to help." "I didn't ask for your help." Herbert stood, turning his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension that had nothing to do with sleep. "You should leave. Now." "Every night?" Kelsey asked quietly. "You relive it every night for 300 years?" His silence was answer enough. "The ritual," she continued, pieces clicking into place. "It's not just about making your immortality permanent. You think it will stop the nightmares, end the curse's torment." "I said leave." But there was no power behind the command, just exhaustion so profound it seemed to age him centuries in moments. Kelsey should have obeyed. Should have backed away from this dangerous intimacy. this glimpse behind the immortal king's carefully maintained walls. Instead, she sat on the edge of his bed, claiming space in his sanctuary the same way she'd claimed space on his throne. "I'll make you a bargain," she said. "Not bound by magic or oaths, just between us. I'll sit with you through the nightmares. However many nights are left before the blood moon. I'll help however I can." "Why?" Herbert turned to face her, his expression raw and unguarded in a way she suspected few people ever saw. "In 6 weeks, I'm going to use you for a ritual that will likely kill you. Why would you offer me comfort?" "Because you gave Ramirez 6 weeks of safety. Because you didn't have to tell me about Alara. Because—" Kelsey paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because I think you've been alone with your guilt for 3 centuries, and nobody should carry that burden without help. You're a fool." But Herbert didn't order her away again. He sank into the chair by his desk, rubbing his face with both hands. "What do you want in return? For this bargain?" "Honesty. About the ritual, about the real risks, about everything you're not telling me. No more calculating silence. If I'm going to die for this, I deserve to know exactly what I'm dying for." Herbert studied her for a long moment, those amber eyes searching her face as if trying to solve an equation that refused to balance. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Every night, I see her burn. The dark magic consumes her from the inside out, and I'm always 3 steps too slow, always just out of reach. She calls my name, and I can't—" His voice cracked, and he stopped, jaw clenched against emotion 3 centuries old. "The ritual is supposed to sever that connection. Use your ember gift to burn away the curse the same way the curse burns through me every night." "But," Kelsey prompted gently, "but channeling that much protective magic through a living person is like trying to pour an ocean through a teacup. The texts suggest that if your will is strong enough, if the bond is strong enough, you might survive. But there are no guarantees, no documented cases of anyone living through it. So you're gambling on ancient theory and desperate hope." "Yes." Herbert met her gaze without flinching. "I've spent 300 years searching for another way. This is all I have left." Silence settled between them, heavy with shared understanding of impossible choices. Finally, Kelsey stood and moved to the chair beside his bed. A reading chair, she realized, probably unused for decades. "What are you doing?" Herbert asked warily. "Sitting with you. We made a bargain." She settled into the chair, arranging her robe. "Try to sleep. I'll wake you if the nightmares come back." "This is absurd. You need rest, too." "Herbert." The use of his name without title made him stop mid-protest. "I'm not leaving. Either you sleep and let me help, or we both stay awake and stare at each other until dawn." For a moment, she thought he'd argue. Then something in his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but close to it. Resignation mixed with something that might have been gratitude. "You're as stubborn as she was," he said quietly, moving back to the bed. "I'll take that as a compliment." Herbert lay down, watching her with wariness that slowly softened into something almost like trust. When his eyes finally closed, Kelsey kept her promise, staying awake and alert. Hours passed. Once his breathing quickened and his hands clenched, the nightmare starting to surface. She reached out and placed her palm against his chest again, and the ember gift responded with gentle warmth, soothing him back to deeper sleep. By the time dawn light crept through the tower windows, something had shifted between them. Not friendship exactly. The gulf between king and servant was too vast for that. But understanding. Recognition. 2 people bound by impossible circumstances, finding unexpected comfort in shared burden. When Herbert woke, he found her still in the chair, drowsing with one hand resting near his shoulder. He didn't wake her immediately. Instead, for the first time in 3 centuries, he lay still and let himself feel something other than guilt and isolation. It felt dangerously close to hope. 3 weeks had passed since Kelsey began her nightly vigil in Herbert's chambers. 3 weeks of watching him sleep more peacefully than he had in centuries, of quiet conversations in the dark hours when walls came down and honesty was easier than pretense. By day, Herbert remained the cold, precise king his court expected. But at night, he was simply a man haunted by old grief, and Kelsey was becoming dangerously comfortable in that intimacy. She should have been more careful. Should have remembered that kindness in the darkness didn't change the brutal calculus of daylight politics. The palace gardens were Ramirez's favorite refuge, and Kelsey had made a habit of walking with her sister each afternoon when council sessions ended. It was one of the few times Ramirez seemed to relax, color returning to her cheeks as she pointed out flowers and chattered about the healing texts she'd been studying. Today, she was excited about a rare herb she'd found growing near the fountain, something that could be used to treat fever. Look at the leaves, Kelsey. See how they're silver underneath? That's how you know it's genuine nightshade bloom, not the common variety. How touching. Ralph's voice cut through Ramirez's enthusiasm like a blade. Sisters reunited, one safe in her gilded cage, the other paying the price for it. Kelsey moved instantly, positioning herself between Ralph and Ramirez. Her sister's hand clutched at her sleeve, trembling. You shouldn't be here, Ralph. The protected wing extends to these gardens. I'm on the public path. Ralph gestured to the stone walkway just beyond the garden's low wall. Technically, he was right. The boundary was precise, and he stood just outside it, close enough to be threatening without quite breaking sanctuary law. I can walk where I please in the king's palace. Or has Herbert given you dominion over that too? The insinuation in his tone made Kelsey's skin crawl. Say what you came to say, then leave us alone. Ralph's smile was all charm and venom. I came to offer congratulations, actually. You've managed what no one else has in 3 centuries. You've gotten close to the immortal king. Very close, from what the servants whisper. They say you spend every night in his chambers now. I serve at his command, Kelsey said coldly, as blood sanctuary requires. Is that what you call it? Ralph leaned against the wall, casual but calculating. Strange how sanctuary looks so much like seduction, how a sister's protection starts to resemble a mistress's privileges. Ramirez made a small sound of distress behind her. Kelsey's hands clenched into fists, the ember gift sparking beneath her skin in response to her rage. You have no right. I have every right to question when ancient laws are perverted for personal gain. Ralph's voice hardened, the charming mask slipping. You used sacred magic to steal what was marked for me, Kelsey. That bond was blessed by fate itself. And now you're in the king's bed, making a mockery of everything our kind holds sacred. Is that what bothers you? Kelsey stepped closer to the boundary, her voice low and furious. That I escaped your trap? Or that you can't control the ember gift the way you planned when you murdered our parents? Ralph's expression went cold. Careful, Kelsey. Your sister's sanctuary depends on your continued service to the king. Accidents happen, even in protected wings. It would be such a tragedy if Ramirez fell ill, or wandered too close to an unguarded balcony. Finish that sentence. Herbert's voice cut through the garden like winter wind. I'd very much like to hear you complete that threat. Ralph straightened so fast he nearly stumbled. Herbert stood at the garden's entrance, and the controlled fury radiating from him made the air feel charged with lightning before a storm. He'd shed his counsel, robes for simple fighting leathers, and somehow that made him more dangerous rather than less, an immortal predator stripped to his essential nature. Your Majesty, Ralph recovered his composure with visible effort. I was merely expressing concern for the ladies' safety. You were threatening them. Herbert moved forward with fluid grace, each step deliberate. In my palace, under my protection. Did you think I wouldn't hear? That I don't have guards stationed precisely to prevent this? Kelsey saw Ralph recalculate, saw him realize the game had shifted in ways he hadn't anticipated. The council has concerns about the sanctuary arrangement, about whether personal attachments might be clouding your Majesty's judgment. The council can bring their concerns to me directly. Herbert stopped just inside the garden boundary, close enough that Ralph had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. What they cannot do is threaten what belongs to me. The possessiveness in those words sent heat through Kelsey's chest. Herbert's gaze flicked to her briefly, amber eyes burning with something that wasn't quite anger, before returning to Ralph. She swore blood sanctuary, Herbert continued, each word precise and deadly. That makes her mine. Her service. Her magic. Her safety. An attack on her is an attack on me. A threat against her sister is a threat against my judgment. Do you understand what you've just done, Ralph? I spoke carelessly, Ralph began, but Herbert cut him off with a gesture. You spoke truthfully. You're gathering council support to challenge my authority. You think my acceptance of Kelsey's oath makes me weak, makes me vulnerable. Herbert's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. You're right that it makes me vulnerable. What you've miscalculated is whether I care. Silence fell over the garden. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. 3 centuries I've ruled without attachment, Herbert said quietly, but his voice carried like thunder. 3 centuries without caring about anything beyond duty and survival. And yes, Ralph, that's changing. She sits with me through nightmares you can't imagine. She offers comfort without asking anything in return. For the first time in longer than you've been alive, I remember what it feels like to care about someone. Kelsey's breath caught. Herbert wasn't supposed to say these things, not publicly, not where they could be used against him. So here's your warning, and you'll only get one. Herbert stepped closer, and Ralph actually backed up. Touch her, threaten her, even speak her name with disrespect again, and I will consider it an act of war. I don't care how many council members you've bribed or what alliances you think you've built. She belongs to me now. That's not weakness, that's a promise. Ralph's face had gone pale. He managed a jerky bow, retreating down the path without another word. The moment he disappeared around the corner, the tension in Herbert's shoulders eased, fractionally. He turned to Ramirez first. Are you hurt? No, Your Majesty. Ramirez's voice was barely a whisper. Thank you for— Go inside. Find the guards waiting at the east entrance. They'll escort you back to your chambers. Herbert's tone gentled slightly. You're safe, Ramirez. That's not going to change. Ramirez fled, leaving Kelsey alone with the king in the flower-scented garden. The silence stretched between them, loaded with everything he'd just confessed in front of witnesses, who would definitely report back to the council. You shouldn't have said those things, Kelsey said finally. You've just given them exactly what they need to challenge you. I know. Herbert moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach. The council will use it. Ralph will use it. They'll claim I've lost objectivity, that I'm compromised by sentiment. Then why? Because it's true. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with unexpected gentleness. For 3 centuries, I've ruled without weakness because I had nothing to protect except duty. Now I have something, someone worth defending. They can call it whatever they want. I call it finally remembering what it means to be alive. Kelsey's hand rose of its own accord, covering his where it rested against her face. The ember gift sparked between them, warm and electric. You've made yourself vulnerable for me. Yes. Herbert's thumb traced her cheekbone. And I'd do it again. Every time, Kelsey. I'd choose you. The words hung in the garden air, more binding than any oath, more dangerous than any curse. Kelsey realized with sudden clarity that the ritual in 3 weeks wasn't the only thing that could destroy them. This growing connection, this impossible tenderness between an immortal king and his sworn servant, it was already burning them both alive. Come on, Herbert said, dropping his hand but not stepping away. I should check the guard rotations, and you should rest. The nightmares are getting worse as we get closer to the blood moon. As they walked back toward the palace together, Kelsey couldn't shake the feeling that Ralph's threat had been less about intimidation and more about testing boundaries. And Herbert had just shown him exactly how to strike where it would hurt most. Not at the king's power or authority, but at his heart. For the first time since swearing sanctuary, Kelsey was genuinely afraid. Not for herself, but for the man who just admitted he cared about her in front of everyone who wanted to see him fall. 1 week remained before the blood moon. Kelsey could feel time running out like sand through her fingers, each day bringing her closer to a ritual that would either free Herbert from his curse or consume her entirely. The nightmares had intensified, becoming so violent that even her presence sometimes took hours to calm him. Tonight was worse than most. Herbert thrashed against sheets twisted like restraints, his voice hoarse from screaming words in a language so old Kelsey didn't recognize it. Ilara's name punctuated the ancient phrases, a desperate prayer repeated across centuries. Kelsey had both hands pressed to his chest now, the ember gift burning steady and warm beneath her palms, but it wasn't enough. Whatever visions held him tonight had claws that refused to release. Herbert. She leaned closer, her voice firm despite her fear. Come back. You're not there anymore. You're here with me. Come back. His eyes snapped open, but they weren't seeing her. They were still trapped in that moment 300 years ago, watching his sister burn. His hand shot out, gripping Kelsey's wrist with crushing strength. I can't reach her, he gasped. She's burning and I can't. Why can't I save her? Because she's gone, Kelsey said gently, ignoring the pain in her wrist. She's been gone for 3 centuries, Herbert. But I'm here, I'm real. Feel my pulse under your fingers. That's now, not then. Something in her words penetrated the nightmare's hold. Herbert's grip loosened, awareness flooding back into his eyes. He released her wrist immediately, sitting up and putting distance between them, with jerky, uncoordinated movements that spoke of profound disorientation. I hurt you. His voice was raw. Your wrist. We'll bruise and heal. Kelsey moved closer despite his withdrawal. We have bigger concerns. The nightmares are getting worse. If this continues, you'll be too weak for the ritual even if I survive channeling the magic. I know. Herbert pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. The curse is fighting back. It knows we're close to breaking it, so it's tightening its grip. Kelsey made a decision then, the same kind of reckless choice that had led her to sit on his throne weeks ago. I need you to answer something honestly. Not as a king to his servant, but as Herbert to Kelsey. He lowered his hands, those amber eyes wary. What? Am I just a tool to you? A means to break your curse? She held his gaze, refusing to look away. Or has something changed between us? Because I need to know, Herbert. I need to know if I'm walking into that ritual as your sacrifice or as something more. The silence stretched so long Kelsey thought he wouldn't answer. Then Herbert stood, moving to the window where pre-dawn light was just beginning to touch the sky. You want honesty? His voice was quiet but not cold. That night you sat on my throne, I accepted your oath because I needed your bloodline magic. You were the opportunity I'd been waiting for. A desperate woman offering exactly what I required to end 3 centuries of torment. The words should have hurt, but Kelsey heard what came beneath them. And now? Herbert turned to face her. Now you've spent 3 weeks sitting with me through my worst nightmares. You've seen me at my most vulnerable, most broken, and you haven't run. You haven't used it against me. You just stayed. He moved closer, and Kelsey saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. You awakened something I thought died with Ilara. Not duty or obligation, but the ability to care about someone beyond what they can do for me. To want to protect them not because it's strategic, but because the thought of losing them is unbearable. Herbert, Kelsey's voice caught. You made me want to be more than a king, he continued. More than an immortal weapon the council deploys when convenient. For the first time in 3 centuries, I wake up and think about something other than survival. I think about whether you slept well, whether Ralph's threats are keeping you awake, whether you're afraid of what's coming. His hand rose to cup her face with devastating gentleness. So no, Kelsey, you're not just a tool to me. You haven't been for weeks. Kelsey leaned into his touch, feeling the ember gift respond to the emotion between them, warming the space where their skin connected. Then why haven't you said anything? Why let me believe? Because it doesn't change what has to happen. Herbert's thumb traced her cheekbone, his expression filled with pain. In 1 week, we attempt a ritual that will probably kill you. My feelings don't alter that reality. They just make it unbearable. What if there's another way? Kelsey caught his wrist, holding his hand against her face. You've been researching for 3 centuries. There must be something. There might be. Herbert's jaw tightened. I found a text 2 weeks ago. Ancient, possibly unreliable, but it suggests a different approach to the ritual. Hope flared in Kelsey's chest. Tell me. Herbert pulled away, moving to his desk and retrieving a leather-bound journal filled with his own notes. The standard ritual requires the ember gift bearer to channel protective magic through force of will alone, essentially burning themselves out to purge the curse. It's a sacrifice, pure and destructive. But this text proposes something different. He opened the journal, showing Kelsey pages covered in sketches and calculations. If the channeling happens willingly, not through coercion but through genuine choice and trust, the magic transforms. Instead of a one-way sacrifice, it becomes a bond. The ember gift doesn't just burn away the curse, it anchors both participants, sharing the burden between them. Shares it how? Kelsey studied the notes, trying to understand. If successful, my immortality breaks, but not catastrophically. I become mortal gradually, over time. And you... Herbert paused, choosing words carefully. You survive, but changed. The ember gift fully awakens and ties permanently to me. We'd be bonded, not by fate or forced magic, but by mutual choice. Kelsey looked up at him. But it requires absolute trust and willing participation. No coercion, no blood sanctuary oath compelling you. You'd have to choose it freely, fully understanding the risks. Herbert's expression was carefully neutral, but Kelsey saw the hope he was trying to hide. And there's no guarantee it works. The text is theoretical. We could both die, or worse, I could survive while you burn out anyway. So our choices are the original ritual where I almost certainly die, or this alternative where we might both die, but could both survive. Yes. Herbert met her eyes. But I can't command you to take that risk, Kelsey. The blood sanctuary oath doesn't cover this. You'd have to choose it freely, and that means I have to give you the freedom to refuse. Kelsey's heart pounded. He was offering her a choice. Real choice, not the illusion of one. He was willing to risk his own freedom, his own chance to break the curse, just to give her agency in what happened next. If I refuse? She asked quietly. Then we don't attempt the ritual at all. Herbert's voice was steady despite the cost those words clearly carried. I'll continue with the nightmares, continue searching for alternatives, but I won't sacrifice you against your will, Kelsey. Not anymore. You'd give up breaking the curse? After 3 centuries? I'd give up anything before I'd force you into something you didn't choose. Herbert moved closer, taking both her hands in his. These weeks with you have taught me that some things matter more than ending my own suffering. Your life, your choice, your freedom, they matter more. Kelsey felt tears burning behind her eyes. This was what love looked like, she realized. Not destiny or fate or magical bonds, but a man willing to remain cursed forever, rather than take her choice away. The alternative ritual, she said slowly. If it works, we'd be bonded. What does that mean exactly? Linked magically. You'd feel echoes of my emotions, I'd sense yours. We'd be able to find each other across any distance. And... Herbert hesitated. The bond would be permanent. Unbreakable. You'd be tied to me for the rest of our lives. Our mortal lives, Kelsey clarified. If you become mortal. Yes. Herbert's grip on her hands tightened. I know it's asking everything. I know the smart choice is to refuse, to save yourself. I choose the alternative ritual, Kelsey interrupted. I choose to try. Herbert went very still. Kelsey, you don't have to decide right now. I'm deciding. She squeezed his hands. You just told me you'd rather stay cursed than take my choice away. How could I walk away from that? How could I not try to save the man who values my freedom more than his own peace? You could die, Herbert said hoarsely. We could both die. Or we could both live. Bonded by choice rather than fate. Kelsey smiled despite her fear. That sounds like something worth risking everything for. Herbert pulled her close, wrapping her in an embrace that felt like both safety and surrender. I don't deserve you, he whispered against her hair. Good thing this isn't about deserving, Kelsey said. It's about choosing, and I choose you, Herbert. I choose us. In the growing dawn light, holding each other while 1 week remained, they both understood the terrifying truth. They'd fallen in love in the shadow of a curse that would either bind them forever or destroy them completely. And somehow, impossibly, that made the risk worth taking. The blood moon rose like a wound in the sky, casting everything in shades of crimson and shadow. Kelsey stood in Herbert's chambers, watching him prepare the ritual space with methodical precision. Ancient symbols drawn in silver dust, candles arranged in patterns that predated written language, texts laid open to pages worn thin by centuries. Everything was ready. In 2 hours, when the moon reached its apex, they would attempt the alternative ritual and discover whether choice was truly stronger than fate. The explosion shattered the careful quiet. Herbert's head snapped toward the window as shouting erupted from below. The clash of steel, the roar of wolves shifting into combat forms, screams cut short. Kelsey's blood turned to ice. Ralph, she whispered. Herbert was already moving, grabbing weapons from the walls with practiced efficiency. He's chosen the worst possible time. The blood moon amplifies all magic, both the ritual and any combat. He strapped on armor with swift, economical movements. Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except... Another explosion, closer this time. The tower shook, dust raining from ancient stones. Through the window, Kelsey saw flames rising from the courtyard, saw figures in shadow pine colors flooding through breached gates. Your Majesty! A guard burst through the door, blood streaming from a wound on his temple. Ralph has breached the inner sanctum with at least 50 wolves. He's demanding trial by blood. The council, some of them are with him, sir. They've turned. Herbert's expression went cold and lethal. How many council members? At least 7 that we've confirmed. High Elder Thorn is among them. The guard swayed, and Kelsey caught him before he fell. They're saying you've been compromised by dark magic, that your attachment to the girl has made you unfit to rule. Of course they are. Herbert finished arming himself, then turned to Kelsey. This is exactly what we discussed. Ralph's been planning this coup for weeks. He just waited until I'd be most vulnerable. The ritual, Kelsey said, understanding dawning. If we're in the middle of channeling magic when he attacks, we'd both be defenseless. Yes. Herbert's jaw tightened. Which means we can't perform it tonight. We'll have to wait for the next blood moon. That's 3 months away? Kelsey moved closer, seeing the exhaustion already pulling at Herbert's features. The nightmares had been brutal lately, leaving him drained even before facing combat. You won't last 3 more months. The curse is killing you slowly. Then I don't last. Herbert cupped her face with both hands, fierce and desperate. But I won't risk you in the middle of a war, Promise me you'll stay here. Let me handle Ralph." Before Kelsey could answer, another guard appeared at the door. "Your Majesty, Ralph is in the Grand Hall. He's invoked trial by blood formally, before witnesses. By law, I have to answer." Herbert's hands dropped from Kelsey's face. "Of course. He knows I can't refuse without looking weak, without validating every accusation he's made." He turned to the guards. "Escort Kelsey and her sister to the protected vault. Full guard. No one gets past you." "Herbert, no." Kelsey grabbed his arm. "Something's wrong. This is too convenient, too perfectly timed. He wouldn't challenge you unless he had an advantage beyond numbers." "I know." Herbert's smile was sharp and bitter. "But I don't have a choice. If I refuse trial by blood, the council will remove me themselves. At least this way, I control some variables." He kissed her then, hard and claiming, tasting of desperation and unspoken goodbyes. When he pulled back, his amber eyes burned with emotion. He no longer bothered hiding. "If this goes badly, the sanctuary extends to Ramirez regardless. That's written into the law. She'll be safe." "What about me?" Kelsey's voice cracked. "You?" Herbert's thumb traced her lower lip. "You're going to survive this and live a long, free life. That's an order." Then he was gone, striding toward the door with the confidence of 3 centuries of combat experience. Kelsey felt hands on her arms, guards pulling her toward safety. But she couldn't look away from Herbert's retreating form. Something was terribly, catastrophically wrong. The Grand Hall had been transformed into a combat arena. Furniture pushed aside, a circle drawn in salt and silver for the trial by blood. Ralph stood at one end, dressed for battle and wearing a smile that made Kelsey's skin crawl. Around the circle, council members watched with expressions ranging from anticipation to barely concealed guilt. High Elder Thorne stood among Ralph's supporters, his face carefully neutral. Herbert entered from the opposite end, and Kelsey, who'd slipped away from her guards because she'd never been good at following orders, saw him stumble slightly. Just a small hitch in his step, barely noticeable, but her healer's instincts screamed alarm. "The Immortal King graces us with his presence," Ralph called out, his voice carrying across the hall. "Tell me, Herbert, does she warm your bed before or after you drain her bloodline magic?" "Careful, Ralph." Herbert's voice was steady, but Kelsey saw him lean almost imperceptibly against a pillar. "You're about to discover why challenging me is typically a fatal mistake." "Am I?" Ralph's smile widened. "Or are you about to discover that immortality has limits?" They entered the circle, and the trial began. For the first few exchanges, Herbert seemed his usual self, faster than possible, stronger than natural, 3 centuries of skill making him untouchable. Ralph barely landed a blow. But then Kelsey saw it happen. Herbert's block came a fraction too slow. Ralph's claws raked across, his ribs, drawing blood that should have sealed immediately but instead continued flowing. Herbert's face went white with understanding. "Shadow's breath," he said quietly. "When?" "The wine at the council meeting this morning." Ralph circled, predator scenting wounded prey. "You drank 3 glasses, Herbert. More than enough to suppress your immortal healing, slow your reflexes, drain your legendary endurance. It won't kill you. That's not what poison is for. It just makes you mortal for a few hours. Long enough." Kelsey's hands clenched on the balcony railing where she'd hidden to watch. Shadow's breath was ancient, rare, nearly impossible to cure once it entered the bloodstream. Herbert was fighting at a fraction of his normal capacity, getting weaker with every passing moment. "The council knew," Herbert said, blocking another strike but stumbling under its force. "They helped you poison me." "Some of them." Ralph pressed his advantage, driving Herbert back toward the circle's edge. "The ones smart enough to see that your attachment to that girl has made you weak. An immortal king doesn't fall in love, Herbert. He doesn't risk everything for one woman. You've proven yourself unfit to rule." Herbert's next parry was too slow. Ralph's blade opened a deep wound across his shoulder. Blood soaked through armor, and Herbert went to one knee. No! Kelsey was moving before conscious thought, running toward the circle despite guards trying to stop her. Stay back! Herbert's voice cracked with command, but Kelsey saw the desperation in his eyes. He was losing. The poison had worked too well, the betrayal cut too deep. Ralph's blade rose for a killing blow. Should have stuck to duty, old friend. Love makes you mortal, in every sense. The blade descended, and Kelsey felt the ember gift ignite in her chest like a star going supernova. She had seconds to choose. Let Herbert die, or do something impossibly reckless that might destroy them both. She chose recklessness. Kelsey threw herself into the circle, her hand finding Herbert's chest exactly as the blood moon reached its apex. The ember gift exploded outward, not as a shield but as a bridge, channeling through their connection, through weeks of trust and growing love, through the bond they'd been planning to forge in ritual. Except now they were forging it in desperation, in combat, with Herbert poisoned and weakening, and Ralph's blade falling toward them both. The world turned crimson and gold as ancient magic recognized impossible choice and decided to answer. Time fractured into crystalline moments. Ralph's blade catching blood moon light. Herbert's face turned toward her, amber eyes wide with horror and understanding. Ramirez screaming from where Ralph's wolves held her at the circle's edge. Insurance, Kelsey realized with cold fury, to keep her from interfering. Guards torn between duty and fear, frozen by the speed of catastrophe. And Kelsey, throwing herself between the falling blade and the man she'd chosen, the ember gift erupting through her like a forest fire finally finding air. But the fire didn't burn outward toward Ralph. It turned inward, seeking the connection forged 3 weeks ago when she'd sat on a throne and sworn herself to an immortal king. The blood sanctuary bond blazed to life. No longer just words and obligation, but a living channel between two souls who'd spent weeks building trust in darkness. Kelsey's hands found Herbert's chest, pressing against armor and flesh and the steady beat of a heart that had survived 3 centuries. The ember gift recognized him instantly, recognized the curse eating him alive, the poison draining his strength, the ancient magic that had chained him to endless suffering. And it recognized something else. This wasn't coercion or duty. This was choice. Pure, terrifying, absolute choice. No, Kelsey, you'll burn yourself out. Herbert tried to push her away, but his poisoned body betrayed him, too weak to resist. Shut up and trust me, Kelsey gasped. The magic was building inside her like pressure before an explosion. This is what we planned, just sooner, more desperate. Trust me, Herbert. Their eyes met. In that moment, with Ralph's blade descending and death certain if this failed, Herbert stopped fighting. His hand rose to cover hers against his chest, and he chose to trust her completely. The ember gift detonated. Fire poured through their connection. But it wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Kelsey felt the magic dive into Herbert's bloodstream, seeking the shadow's breath poison with surgical precision. Where it touched the toxin, flames consumed it, burning away the suppression magic without harming flesh. She felt Herbert gasp as his immortal healing suddenly roared back to life, wounds sealing, strength flooding back. But the ember gift wasn't finished. It found the curse next. That ancient, festering wound wrapped around Herbert's soul like chains. 3 centuries of guilt and suffering. The dark magic that forced him to relive his sister's death every night. The immortality that had become a prison rather than a gift. Kelsey pushed deeper, channeling not just protective fire but love itself. Weeks of sitting with him through nightmares, of seeing him vulnerable and choosing to stay, of building something real in the spaces between duty and destiny. The curse fought back, trying to maintain its grip, but the ember gift had been forged specifically to protect through sacrifice. And this was the ultimate protection. Saving Herbert not just from poison and enemies, but from himself. The curse shattered. Kelsey felt it break like glass, felt centuries of dark magic dissolve in flames of pure choice. But the ritual text had been right. This wasn't just destruction. The Ember Gift was creating something new in the curse's place, weaving a bond between them that had nothing to do with fate or obligation, and everything to do with two people choosing each other freely. The bond snapped into place with force that drove them both to their knees. Suddenly, Kelsey could feel Herbert's emotions like they were her own. Shock, wonder, overwhelming relief, and beneath it all, love so fierce it took her breath away. She knew he felt hers too. Determination, fear, and the same impossible love that had driven her into this circle. Impossible, Ralph's voice cracked through their shared awareness. His blade had stopped inches from them, held back by a shield of golden fire. She's just a girl, she can't. She's not just anything, Herbert said, rising to his feet with fluid grace. The weakness was gone, purged by Kelsey's fire. But something else had changed too. Kelsey could feel it through their bond. His immortality was unraveling, not catastrophically but gradually, making him mortal over time just as the ancient text had suggested. She's my choice, and I'm hers. Herbert pulled Kelsey up beside him, and she felt their combined power thrumming through the bond. Her Ember Gift, fully awakened now, and his 3 centuries of combat skill and magical knowledge. Together they were something Ralph hadn't anticipated. Ralph snarled and lunged, but Herbert moved with restored speed, disarming him in 3 precise strikes. Ralph hit the ground hard, blade skittering away across salt and silver. It's over, Herbert said coldly. Yield or die. Never. Ralph tried to rise, reaching for a concealed dagger. I'll kill you both. I'll take what's mine. The Ember Gift flared again, but this time Kelsey directed it with purpose. Fire poured from her hands, not to destroy but to reveal. It washed over Ralph like judgment, and suddenly everyone in the hall could see what Kelsey had seen in her father's journals. Images pulled from Ralph's own memory and projected in flames of truth. Ralph orchestrating the hunting accident, Ralph bribing witnesses, Ralph planning to claim the Ember bloodline through Ramirez, to use their family's magic for his own ambitions. Every crime, every manipulation, every death laid bare for all to witness. The hall erupted in shocked outrage. Even the council members who'd supported Ralph recoiled, their faces pale with horror at what they'd enabled. You see? Herbert's voice carried across the arena. This is what challenged my throne. This is what some of you chose to support. His amber eyes swept across the assembled wolves, and Kelsey felt his fury through their bond, tempered by 3 centuries of political calculation. The trial by blood is finished. Ralph has lost. Guards moved in immediately, seizing Ralph even as he screamed denials that rang hollow against the evidence literally burned into everyone's minds. His allied council members were taken into custody as well, including High Elder Thorne, whose expression had gone from smug confidence to ashen disbelief. Across the arena, more guards released Ramirez, who ran to Kelsey sobbing with relief. Kelsey caught her sister, holding her close while the Ember Gift settled back into her chest, no longer dormant, but awake and waiting, forever connected to the man who stood beside her. Herbert's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice despite this being the first time they'd held hands outside his chambers. Through their bond, Kelsey felt his exhaustion, his relief, and underneath everything, a wonder that had nothing to do with breaking his curse, and everything to do with the fact that she'd survived. You're mortal now, Kelsey said quietly, only for him. I can feel it. The immortality is fading. Yes, Herbert squeezed her hand. We're both going to age and die like normal people. Terrifying, isn't it? Terrifying, Kelsey agreed, smiling despite everything. And perfect. Around them, the hall slowly descended into organized chaos. Guards securing prisoners, council members arguing about succession and legitimacy, healers tending to the wounded. But in the center of it all, connected by a bond forged in desperation and choice, two people who'd gambled everything on love stood together. The blood moon began to set, taking its crimson light with it. Dawn was coming, bringing with it all the complicated consequences of what they'd just done. But for this moment, watching the first pale hints of sunrise, Kelsey and Herbert simply held each other and breathed. They'd survived. They'd chosen each other. And that, Kelsey thought, was its own kind of magic, stronger than curses, deeper than destiny, and absolutely worth the risk. The council chamber felt different in morning light. Gone was the blood moon's crimson cast, replaced by pale sunshine that made everything seem both clearer and more complicated. Ralph knelt in the center of the room, stripped of weapons and dignity, flanked by guards whose expressions suggested they'd enjoy any excuse to make him hurt. Around them, the remaining council members sat in rigid silence, waiting to see which way judgment would fall. Herbert stood before his throne but didn't sit. Kelsey could feel his exhaustion through their bond, the slow transformation from immortal to mortal, taking more out of him than he'd admit aloud. But his voice remained steady as he addressed the chamber. Ralph of the former Shadowpine Pack, you stand convicted of murder, conspiracy, treason, and attempted regicide. The evidence was witnessed by everyone present last night, burned into memory by magic that cannot lie. Herbert's amber eyes were cold. The traditional sentence for these crimes is death, immediate and public. Ralph lifted his head, hatred burning in his expression. Then do it, immortal. Oh wait, you're not immortal anymore, are you? You're just a man now, mortal, weak. Herbert. Kelsey stepped forward before he could respond, feeling his surge of anger through their connection. She placed a hand on his arm, grounding them both. May I speak? Herbert's eyes searched her face, and through their bond she felt his surprise mixed with curiosity. He nodded once, gesturing for her to continue. Kelsey turned to face Ralph, and the chamber fell silent. You murdered my parents, she said, her voice carrying despite its quietness. You orchestrated their deaths, bribed witnesses, and tried to claim my sister through false bonds. You deserve death for what you've done. Ralph's smile was sharp and bitter. Then we agree on something. But killing you doesn't bring them back. Kelsey moved closer, and she felt Herbert's protective instinct flare through their bond. She sent reassurance back, letting him know she was safe. It doesn't heal what you broke. It just continues the cycle. Violence answered with violence, death breeding more death. That's not justice. That's just revenge. What are you suggesting? High Elder Morvain, one of the few council members not implicated in the coup, leaned forward with interest. Strip him of everything, Kelsey said. His name, his rank, his pack bonds. Exile him as a lone wolf with nothing but the memory of his crimes. Let him live with what he's done, with what he destroyed for ambition that came to nothing. That's a worse punishment than a quick death. You can't be serious, Ralph snarled. You're showing me mercy? No. Kelsey's voice hardened. I'm showing you the consequences of your choices. Every day you wake up alone, you'll remember that you had power and threw it away for greed. You'll remember that the ember gift you coveted so badly was the instrument of your defeat. That's not mercy, Ralph. That's justice that lasts. Silence fell across the chamber. Herbert's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing. And through their bond, she felt his fierce pride mixed with love so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. The sentence is exile, Herbert declared, effective immediately. You have until sunset to leave Packlands. If you're found within our territory after that, the mercy Kelsey showed you will be void. Do you understand? Ralph's face contorted with rage, and something that might have been fear. Exile was considered worse than death by many wolves, cut off from pack bonds, from the communal magic that made them strong, forced to survive alone against a world that didn't tolerate lone wolves kindly. I understand, Ralph bit out. I'll remember this, Kelsey. I'll remember. You'll remember nothing that matters, Herbert interrupted coldly. Take him away. As guards dragged Ralph from the chamber, Herbert turned his attention to the remaining council members. Several shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. Now we address the rot in this council, Herbert said. 7 of you supported Ralph's coup. 7 of you chose ambition over duty, personal gain over the good of the packs you're supposed to serve. He gestured, and guards moved to stand behind each of the implicated members. You're stripped of your positions, effective immediately. You'll face individual trials for your specific crimes. Those found guilty will be exiled as well. High Elder Thorne rose shakily. Your Majesty, surely... Surely nothing, Herbert cut him off. You helped poison me, Thorne. You supported a murderer's claim to power because you thought it would benefit you personally. There is no defense, no justification, no mercy for that level of betrayal. Thorne was led away, along with the other conspirators. The remaining council members, barely half their original number, looked shaken. The council needs rebuilding, Morvayn said carefully. Your Majesty, if you wish to appoint replacements... I do, Herbert said, but first I have an announcement. He paused, and Kelsey felt him gathering courage through their bond. I'm abdicating within the year. The chamber erupted. Wolves shot to their feet, voices overlapping in shock and protest. Morvayn looked stricken. Even Ramirez, sitting in the visitor gallery, gasped audibly. Herbert raised his hand, and silence gradually returned. My immortality is broken. The curse that bound me for 3 centuries is gone. I'm becoming mortal, as I should have been all along. His grip on Kelsey's hand tightened. 300 years I've ruled because I couldn't die. That's not leadership. That's just survival. But who will lead us? A young council member asked, genuinely distressed. A council of elected alphas, serving limited terms and accountable to the packs they represent, Herbert said. I'm establishing a new system before I leave, one where power transfers peacefully, where leaders are chosen for wisdom rather than immortality, where no one rules for centuries simply because they can't be removed. Morvayn's expression shifted from shock to something resembling hope. A revolutionary change. A necessary one. Herbert looked around the chamber. But the most important change isn't political, it's personal. He turned to face Kelsey fully, and through their bond, she felt his nervousness mixed with determination. I'm also abolishing the mandatory bonding ceremonies. No more forced mate bonds. No more destiny dictating who you'll love. From this day forward, wolves choose their own partners freely, or choose not to partner at all. That choice belongs to the individual, not to magic or tradition. The silence this time was stunned. For centuries, bonding ceremonies had been sacred law, the foundation of pack structure and bloodline politics. Herbert was dismantling it with a single declaration. Your Majesty, Morvayn said slowly, this will change everything. Good. Herbert's smile was sharp. Everything needs changing. He raised Kelsey's hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth cascading through their bond. I spent 3 centuries ruling through duty and obligation. I'm done with that. I want to build something new. A life based on choice, partnership, and love freely given. He turned back to the assembled council. I'll remain king for 1 year to oversee the transition. I'll establish the new council structure, train my successors, and ensure the reforms take hold. And then... His eyes found Kelsey's again. Then I'm going to retire with the woman who saved me from my curse and taught me that some things matter more than power. Through their bond, Kelsey felt Herbert's question before he voiced it aloud. If she'll have me. Not because sanctuary binds her, not because magic compels her, but because she chooses it freely. Every eye in the chamber turned to Kelsey. Ramirez was crying openly in the gallery. Morvain looked like he was watching history being made. The remaining council members seemed caught between shock and dawning understanding. Kelsey smiled, feeling the ember gift warm in her chest. No longer a burden or obligation, but a symbol of protective love, freely chosen. "I choose you," she said clearly. "Not because I have to, because I want to. Because you've shown me that the greatest power isn't destiny or magic or eternal life. It's the courage to choose love and build something real together." Herbert pulled her close, kissing her in front of the entire council, with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. Through their bond, Kelsey felt his joy, his relief, his overwhelming love. And she felt something else, his mortality settling into place like a key in a lock, making him finally, completely human. When they broke apart, Herbert addressed the chamber one last time. "We have work to do. A year to rebuild what corruption nearly destroyed. But we'll do it together. Not as immortal king and obligated servant, but as partners choosing to make things better." His hand found Kelsey's again. "Let's begin." As the council members slowly began discussing logistics and reforms, as Ramirez rushed down to embrace her sister, as the first day of a new era dawned over the palace, Kelsey and Herbert stood together. Connected by a bond forged in desperation but sustained by choice, ready to build something new from the ashes of ancient traditions. The greatest revolution, Kelsey thought, wasn't political. It was personal. It was choosing love over destiny, partnership over power, and freedom over fate. And that revolution started with two people brave enough to choose each other. Consequences be damned. The year passed like water through fingers, too fast and never fast enough. Herbert threw himself into reform with the focused intensity of someone who'd spent 3 centuries ruling and wanted to ensure his legacy lasted beyond his departure. The new council structure took shape slowly, built on principles of accountability and limited terms. Young alphas were trained in governance, learning that leadership was service rather than dominion. The bonding ceremonies were reformed into celebrations of choice rather than obligation, and the change rippled through pack territories like wind through wheat fields. Through it all, Kelsey stood beside Herbert, not behind him as tradition dictated, but as his equal partner. They worked, together on policy reforms, adjudicated disputes as a team, and slowly, carefully, showed their people what partnership looked like when built on choice rather than command. Their bond deepened with each passing day, the connection between them settling into something as natural as breathing. Kelsey could feel Herbert's mortality taking hold, gray threading through his dark hair, lines appearing at the corners of his eyes, a slowness in his movements that spoke of actual fatigue rather than immortal endurance wearing thin. He'd never looked more beautiful to her. 3 weeks before the abdication ceremony, an oracle arrived at the palace. She was ancient, her white hair woven with silver threads, and her eyes clouded with visions of paths not yet taken. She asked for an audience with Herbert and Kelsey, and despite the suspicious timing, they granted it. The oracle settled into a chair in Herbert's study, no longer sparse and fortress-like, but warmer now, with Kelsey's books and Ramirez's healing journals scattered among Herbert's military texts and ancient treaties. The change was symbolic, Herbert had said once, no more living like a weapon waiting to be deployed. "You're worried," the oracle said without preamble, her voice surprisingly strong. "Wondering if breaking ancient magic so completely will carry consequences you haven't yet seen." Kelsey and Herbert exchanged glances. Through their bond, she felt his wariness mixed with curiosity. "The thought has occurred to us," Herbert admitted, "as it should." The oracle accepted tea from Ramirez, who'd been sitting in on their meetings more often, learning statecraft alongside healing. "Magic that old doesn't break easily. When it does, there are always echoes." "What kind of echoes?" Kelsey's hand found Herbert's automatically, their fingers interlacing. The oracle smiled, and it transformed her face into something almost youthful. The kind that prove you were right all along. She set down her tea and fixed them both with those clouded eyes that somehow saw too much. The Ember Gift has existed in your bloodline for 1,000 years, Kelsey. Do you know what the original prophecy said about it? That it would protect through sacrifice, Kelsey said, reciting what she'd been taught since childhood. That women of our line would channel fire to shield those we loved, even at cost to ourselves. That's what the prophecy became, after centuries of interpretation and tradition. The oracle's expression turned sad. But the original words spoke of something different. They spoke of two souls who would choose each other freely across impossible circumstances, who would break chains of obligation, both the curse binding one and the destiny binding the other, to prove that the truest magic lives in choice, not fate. Herbert leaned forward. You're saying the prophecy was about us specifically? I'm saying the prophecy was about the principle you embody. The oracle gestured between them. An immortal king cursed by his own grief, unable to save his sister and trapped in endless suffering. A woman from the Ember line, taught that her value lay in sacrificial protection. Both of you bound by forces beyond your control, until you chose to break free together. The Ember Gift, Kelsey said slowly, understanding dawning. It was never meant to be about self-destruction. It was always supposed to be about protective love given freely. Exactly. The oracle stood, moving to the window where afternoon light painted everything gold. You've transformed the magic, Kelsey. Made it what it was always meant to be before fear and tradition corrupted its purpose. And Herbert, she turned to him. You've proven that immortality isn't strength. Choosing mortality, choosing limitation, choosing love over endless survival, that's the bravest thing an immortal can do. So there are no consequences? Herbert asked, and Kelsey felt his careful hope through their bond. No prices yet to be paid? Oh, there are consequences. The oracle's smile widened. You'll both grow old. You'll both die eventually. You'll face all the limitations and heartbreaks that mortality brings. Those are the consequences of your choice. And the gift? Ramirez spoke up from her corner. What happens to the Ember Gift now that it's changed? The oracle's gaze shifted to her, gentle and knowing. It remains, but transformed. No longer a burden passed through bloodline obligation, but a gift that awakens when someone chooses protective love freely. It may skip generations. It may appear in unexpected places, but it will always respond to the same principle. Love given without coercion, protection offered without self-destruction. She moved toward the door, and they realized the audience was ending. You've rewritten the story, she said in parting. Not just for yourselves, but for everyone who comes after. That's the real prophecy fulfilled. Sleep well, knowing you've earned it. After she left, silence filled the study. Finally, Herbert pulled Kelsey close, pressing a kiss to her temple. We're really doing this, leaving all of it behind. Terrified? Kelsey asked, feeling his nervousness through their bond. Terrified, he agreed, and more excited than I've been in 300 years. The abdication ceremony was brief by design. Herbert stood before the assembled packs and council, read the formal documents transferring power to the elected leadership, and then stepped down from the throne for the last time. No crown to remove, he'd never worn one, preferring to rule through presence rather than symbols. Just a man walking away from power because he'd found something more valuable. Kelsey, Ramirez, and Herbert left the palace that same day. Their new home was a cottage on ancestral lands that had belonged to Kelsey's family for generations, nestled in mountains that caught morning light like a blessing. It was small, comfortable, and nothing like the fortress tower Herbert had occupied for centuries. It was perfect. Seasons passed. Herbert learned to plant gardens and complained about mortal aches with exaggerated dramatics that made Kelsey laugh until she cried. Kelsey mastered the Ember gift fully, using it to help establish healing centers where wolves could receive care regardless of rank or bloodline. Ramirez threw herself into her studies, becoming a renowned healer who traveled between packs, teaching new techniques, and occasionally writing letters about interesting patients and handsome young alphas she had no intention of bonding with. Her choice, freely made. On an evening 2 years after abdication, Kelsey stood at their cottage window watching sunset paint the mountains in shades of amber and gold. Herbert's arms came around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder in a gesture that had become habit. "Regrets?" he asked softly. Through their bond, she felt his contentment mixed with lingering wonder that this was his life now. "Not a single one," Kelsey answered honestly. "You?" "Only that I didn't meet you 3 centuries ago." His arms tightened around her. "We could have had more time. We have enough time." Kelsey turned in his embrace, rising on her toes to kiss him. "However long we get, it's enough because we chose it." From the garden, Ramirez's laugh rang out as she argued with a visiting pack healer about the proper preparation of fever remedy. The sound was pure joy, unmarred by obligation or fear. Inside, their cottage was warm with lamplight and the smell of dinner cooking. Outside, the world continued turning. But it turned differently now, shaped by reforms and principles they'd helped establish. The greatest power, Kelsey had learned, wasn't destiny or magic or eternal life. It was the revolutionary act of choosing love when duty demanded sacrifice, of building partnership on trust rather than obligation, of creating a life defined by freedom rather than fate. They'd broken curses and defied destiny. They'd transformed ancient magic and toppled traditions. But the real victory was quieter, simpler, and infinitely more profound. It was standing in a cottage kitchen with Herbert's hand in hers, planning tomorrow while yesterday's ghosts rested peacefully at last. They'd chosen each other. They'd chosen life, with all its limitations and heartbreaks and beautiful, fleeting moments. And in making that choice, they'd proven that love freely given was stronger than any prophecy, deeper than any magic, and worth every risk they'd taken to claim it. The blood moon would rise again someday. Destinies would call to new souls. Ancient powers would demand their due. But Herbert and Kelsey would face it all as they faced everything else now, together, as equals, as partners who'd proven that the courage to choose your own path was the most powerful magic of all. As darkness settled over the mountains and stars began to appear, Kelsey squeezed Herbert's hand and felt his love, through their bond, steady as a heartbeat. They'd rewritten their story. They'd changed their world. And in the end, the greatest triumph was simply this. They'd built a life worth living, one choice at a time. That was the truest magic. That was the real happily ever after, and it was more than enough. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.